oh my God, I'm in trouble. And then they did a little test and it came in purple, and then they came to me and it says marijuana. And I'm like, well, yeah, I can smell it's marijuana, but it's not mine. This is my bag, and this is not mine. But they were getting my brother to touch it and do all things, and I'm like, it didn't hit me. What's happening?
I'll just pause there. Look, it's heartbreaking to watch that. I don't know what you think, Josh. Have you had a chance to see any of these interviews, Josh?
Yeah, that's really.
Look, I've played that particular one over and over again, trying to watching her face, looking at her eyes. It's a very emotional experience to watch that. My gut feeling is she's innocent. Of course, my gut feeling is irrelevant, and I don't really want to, bring that into it. But what I see there is someone not prevaricating, not doing some shifty thing. I just see someone, and she's been this way all the way through, very consistently. Her position has been absolutely consistent, and it doesn't. That is in itself not consistent with someone who's guilty. I mean, but by the time she was convicted, if she'd been guilty, I think she would have done a deal. I think she would have confessed, and she probably would have got off. She would have got probably 5 years tops. You know what I mean? Like, there was no benefit to her from insisting on her innocence. So that's just my total gut feeling. I'll hand it back over to you, Sean.
Yeah, we're just that naive. We're like any family. We just believe that in the end justice will prevail. Like there's enough evidence there to prove that she's innocent, and this can't happen. So we just kept on, but well, the footage from Australia will come through. That'll prove it. For Schapelle to ask for the footage from any Australian airport, like she went through Brisbane Airport, Sydney domestic, and then Sydney International. If one frame of that footage showed that Schapelle had a pregnant boogie board, or she would have had a change of plea. And
Absolutely.
There's no way in the world she could control or know what footage was taken, and yet she's the one asking for this. There are approximately 40 cameras in Brisbane Airport, from when you get out of your car, you're under surveillance, down through in through the check-in, and then down through to the oversized baggage. And for her to think that every camera is turned off is just crazy. And how the hell could she ever control that? She's works in a fish and chip shop, so we really believed it was going to be all over. We thought, well, we'll just be able to get that footage. That'll prove that the marijuana wasn't in there when she checked it in, and that's the end of it. All of a sudden, the bag footage disappeared. There is no footage from Brisbane, Sydney, or Sydney International.
Yes, I forgot to mention that when I was summarising. When I was summarising the lack of proper investigation and forensic evidence, the footage, the lack of the prosecution being able to provide any camera footage is another glaring failure of the prosecution to prove its case. And that includes footage from Indonesia or from Australia. But please continue.
The footage from Indonesia would have proved who was telling the truth right there and then. When Arta sat in the court and said that Schapelle said the marijuana was hers and that she didn't want to open the bag and so forth, she called him a liar in court. Right then and there, the defence asked for the footage, and the judge said, if we need to. Now, that would have proved it, one way or the other, who was telling the truth. And if you've only got to look at, if it happened in Australia, if someone attacked someone and said, there's footage, and one person's saying one thing, the other person's saying the other, well, if they won't show the footage, well, who do you think's the guilty party?
Indeed.
If they had the ability to bring that footage forward.
But the failure of the Australian authorities, and I'm talking about Qantas, I'm talking about the airports, I'm talking about everyone, and they bounced the ball. Like the airport said it was Qantas, the Qantas said it was the airport. They were all pointing the finger at each other to avoid doing the right thing, which was to just supply the tapes. That's all they had to do.
Qantas had a vested interest. They really don't want to have an innocent tourist leave Australia and become a drug smuggler at the other end. So they really didn't want to be too helpful, because they wouldn't have wanted that footage to come out, because then it'd be proof positive that their security system doesn't work.
Absolutely. Now, look, I'd just like to summarise here what I think are two really, really important issues in this whole saga, okay? One is we have a miscarriage of justice and a person suffering in prison, which is appalling, okay? I my heart goes out to you and your family and to Schapelle, and it is one of the many injustices that are occurring in this world at this time, and it's important. But there is another issue here, and it's part of something bigger, right? And this is that what we see is that in the case of Schapelle, it was decided early on by our government that in order not to offend Indonesia, in order to appease Indonesia, that they were willing to sacrifice an Australian citizen for the sake of political expediency. But it gets worse. It gets worse. And this is where we're all affected. This is where we're all victims, okay? It's not just Schapelle. Once they'd made that decision, the government and the corporate media cartels together conspired to a campaign of criminal, fraudulent news reporting to change public opinion, because public opinion was 90% believing that she was innocent and demanding a response from the government.
Oh, look, they're extremely clever in the way they do it. Like, they every time there's a news story about Schapelle, they'll always say convicted. They'll preface it by saying convicted drug smuggler Schapelle Corby, and this reinforces in our minds that she's a convicted drug smuggler.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I've got a headline here from the Herald Sun from about a year ago. It says, Schapelle Corby's defence, a pack of lies. That's the headline, right?
Yeah.
But the body of the article is about that that scumbag lawyer who was later, disbarred anyway, who basically said a lot of nonsense. And basically, his name was Robin Tampo, for our listeners. He was actually disbarred for what he said in the end, but he made all these outrageous claims that have there is no follow-up, no substantiation to what he said. But Herald Sun...
What Robin Tampo said was that he made that defence. Well, in a sense, he followed on from... There was on Triple J, there was a show called Hack, and when just after it happened, there was quite a few people ringing in, and they were saying, well, a couple of baggage handlers rang in, and they said it's a well-known fact that marijuana can be, thrown into a bag at one end, and they'll ring up the guy at, say, Brisbane Airport and so forth. So there was a little bit of... that's where the original story come from. After all Schapelle's other avenues of defence, when she asked for DNA, she's asked for fingerprinting, she's asked for all these other things, for the bags to be weighed, for everything that the footage from Australia, every turn she would come to a dead end, there's nothing left for defence. So the only defence they had was to use that defence, and which was to put an element of doubt that possibly it was baggage handlers. Schapelle didn't know where the marijuana come from, but that was all she was left with. So that's the defence they used, because it was feasible.
Absolutely. And look, these...
But let me just say this, but it wasn't baggage handlers in Australia. We're quite sure of that, because of what the Bali police, the way they acted, there could only be one reason for their actions. And, like within the first 2 hours, there was footage of... The Bali police, for one thing, were the ones that called all the media, because there was a lot of media there to cover the second anniversary of the Bali bombing. Yeah. So there was a lot of media already in Bali. So at that stage... at one stage, the footage has, I'm not sure what channel it was on, but I've been told it was on in 7 in Perth, where a policeman's holding the bag above his head, marijuana bag above his head, walking through the throng of reporters, and one of the reporters asked him, what are they going to weigh the bags? And right there and then, he says, no, it's not necessary.
Well, that's fascinating,
that just
isn't it?
defies human nature. At that stage... How could they possibly know what the prosecutor would want, what defence strategy, we were going to use or she was going to use, they would need they would be preserving every piece of evidence, and yet they were doing quite the opposite. They were destroying evidence.